I'm Sarah,
And I'm Chelsea.
and this is Weathered. Well, today for our debut for the podcast, I have a pretty intense tornado story. I didn't mean to, for the very first episode, it to be the worst tornado in history,
Well, here we
but
go.
it happened.
Yeah.
So this one's probably going to be a two-parter because it's got a lot of information and really long. So we'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll probably have to stop and finish the talk of the destruction in the next episode.
Okay.
Okay. So this episode is going to be about the tri-state tornado. And so this one happened a really, really long time ago. And it's actually like really interesting to me to talk about ones that happened that long ago because I think sometimes we take for granted like all the weather alert systems we have now and all of that. And when you read about some of these older ones, they had nothing.
Right. Like it was just, uh-oh, there's a tornado outside.
Yeah, like you just had to
Like,
pay attention to the sky.
oh no.
And well, you'll hear this one was in the Midwest, so a lot of times farmers, depended on their animals or whatever to let them go
Right.
too. So, but so on March 18th, 1925, this day started out like any other day in the Midwest. The forecast called for some rain and cooler temperatures, which was not uncommon for March. And now I guess I live close to the Midwest and I'm seeing what that's like. I think it's goes from 60 to 40 and back, and we've had so much rain, and we're in
Right.
April right now. So, but I think that's what they were experiencing in this March. So, and like we said at the time, weather predictions were definitely not like they are today. People usually relied on the farmers actually to alert them if bad weather was coming. But as we know, Mother Nature can be extremely unpredictable, and the weather that day took a dark turn. Around 1 p.m., a tornado that would become known to this day as the most deadly tornado in U.S. history touched down in Ellington, Missouri. It would travel for over 3 hours and spend 219 miles on the ground, which is the longest on the ground
Yeah.
trek of any tornado in US history.
It's also insane to think there were no predictions. Like this just came out of nowhere.
And you hear people say that today, and you're like, but no, really. In 1925, it really came out of nowhere. Um, from what it sounds like, it was just kind of a normal day, and they knew the spring weather was going to be a little unpredictable as far as rain and stuff, but they didn't know what was coming, what was about to hit them. So, as I mentioned, it started in Missouri. It traveled through Illinois before coming to an end in Indiana. So that's three states, hence where it
Yeah.
got its name, the tri state tornado.
Yeah.
During its path of destruction, it killed 695 people. And when you think about that number, it's a lot. I mean, now with tornadoes, luckily we hear usually less than that.
Yeah. I mean, this is when like that's a lot of people considering nowadays. Sadly, there are still a lot of deaths, but that's like maybe triple.
Yeah. And like taking out whole towns, basically. Because as we'll hear, it's mostly rural areas too. So
Yeah.
that's even crazier.
Yeah.
So it holds the record for the most fatalities of a single tornado still.
Hmm.
And so, yes, you heard that right. It holds records for the longest track on the ground, the most fatalities, and also even the fastest ground speeds at 73 miles per hour. which is
Jeez.
interesting because you think about them now too. And usually you think if you're in a car, like you're going to outrun it potentially because they don't usually move that fast. Um, but you just never know. Don't
Right.
try to outrun them. I see those storm chasers. Do you follow those storm chasers on like YouTube and stuff?
No.
Yeah, there's
But I will
some
now.
crazy ones. So last time we had bad storms here, which was what, like, I feel like it was just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was following, and I'll go ahead and shout him out, Ryan Hall on YouTube. I think his handle is like Ryan Hall y'all because he's from Kentucky. And he has storm chasers on the ground while he's doing like weather, you know, real time news and letting you
Yeah,
know.
like live updates. Crazy. It's
So
like
he has
some
people.
real life Twister stuff.
Yes, it really is.
Uh-huh.
Oh, my favorite movie.
I know. I watched it the other day and I was like, oh my God,
It's so
I love this
good.
movie. It's so good.
We'll have another Twister reference here in a few, so
Ooh,
we can come
wonder what
back
it
to that.
is.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the events of those few hours and some of the horrific things that happened at the hands of the storm.
Okay.
So, Ellington, Missouri was the first place the tornado hit. And the first victim was actually a farmer. His name was Sam Flowers. And he was actually originally from Tennessee. I thought that was cool because that's where we're from.
Yeah.
I don't know why he was in Missouri, but so he was the first victim. He had been out on his horse that day and he was totally unsuspecting of the tornado coming, which is also kind of an interesting fact, I think, because like we said earlier, farmers usually had a little bit more of a pulse on the weather
Sure.
than other people. So if the farmers didn't even realize it was coming, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So shortly after the tornado touched down, his horse had actually wandered back to the farm. And so his family was like, okay, what's going on? Like, here's his horse, but where is he?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be the weirdest? Like, I bet their heart just dropped. Like, oh
Oh, you
no.
know. Yeah, it's terrifying as a parent or anybody just to think about like someone you love just not coming back, but their horse did. Like,
Yeah,
it's probably not good.
I know. Definitely not. So several hours later, he was found under a tree and it was quite a ways away. There's really not any reporting that says exactly how far, but his head was just like completely bashed in. So don't really know. We kind of assume that the tornado came and he was like thrown off the horse, maybe hit the tree that he was found under and did not survive. But tornado kept going. And so at this point, he couldn't have like warned anyone that it was coming, right? So no one
Right.
even still knows what's happening.
Yeah.
Annapolis, Missouri would be the next town hit. At this point, the tornado was only considered moderately strong and only killed 4 people in that area. I say only,
Okay.
but I mean, 4
Still.
people. But it destroyed about 90% of the buildings in Annapolis, in that town. So it just like obliterated the town. And the people that died were actually, they were hit by flying pieces of wood, basically. And I think that happens a lot with tornadoes. Like you don't realize that that's really why you shouldn't be outside if you can help it, because or near external walls in your house, because
Right.
it's literally just like ripping limbs off of trees, ripping trees out of the ground. And when those come, I just think of like Final Destination,
Oh,
like
yeah.
wood.
Something's fallen off the back of a truck and straight into your head.
Same thing, really, with the
I
tornado.
know.
And luckily, even though the tornado hit the schoolhouse, um, all the children survived, which unfortunately we will see is not the case in other towns as the tornado keeps going. So to me, it's fascinating that we're still so early in the story and it's killing people, and yet it's considered, moderately bad.
Right.
Um, so that's why, like, sometimes when I see the weather on the internet or on TV, and they say like moderate chance or like moderate tornadoes expect, like
You're like, it doesn't
Moderate
matter.
tornado. Yeah, it's still bad.
Yeah,
Take it serious.
right.
Okay, so over the next several miles, the area luckily was not very populated. It was interesting because it was mostly populated by German immigrants who had settled there. It was very rural and lots of woods around. So it can get difficult when you look at the documentation of the tornado and where it went. The path is kind of hard to follow when it gets to that area because of all the woods. So there's not like a clear path on the through the grass that you can see
Right.
where it hit. Most people, though, that have studied this tornado do believe that there was no break in its track on the ground during that time. So that's kind of why we still see that longest track on the ground record, because a lot of tornadoes that we'll see in future episodes, they hop a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Not this
So
one. This one said, I'm here.
it was plowing through trees.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know how many hills are in that area, but I'm sure it's probably fairly flat.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so it claimed a few more lives as it moved toward the Missouri River, picking up speed and intensity. In the unincorporated community of Ridge, the schoolhouse was literally picked up off its foundation and thrown across a field. But again, crazy enough, no students were killed.
How? It like that's unbelievable.
Can you imagine?
No.
Like
No,
you're
I
just sitting
cannot.
at your desk.
No. Mm-mm. No. I would prefer to never imagine that.
And I hate that there's like no stories documented. That's another thing that's like hard about these old ones
And there's no one
is
to really talk about it.
no. And I mean, there were some, obviously, I got some of this research from newspaper articles and stuff from back then, but they weren't like interviewing children and saying, what was it like when your schoolhouse was picked up and thrown?
Right. Where now we would have so much information.
Although it did say that they were injured and slightly traumatized. So
Yeah, I
I
can
imagine
only
it was,
imagine.
yeah.
Slightly traumatized. Okay.
Ugh, I'm sure they were pretty scared of storms for the rest of their lives.
Oh yeah.
All right. So by the time the tornado reached the Missouri River, which is the state line of Missouri and Illinois, I didn't realize, I'm learning geography as I'm studying these two
Yeah.
because the Missouri River is the state line between Missouri and Illinois. So it had landed in Missouri and it's moving toward Illinois. And at this point, it's to the state line. It has killed 13 people and at times has been more than a mile wide at this point.
Oh my, jeez.
Yeah, so there wasn't really a lot of stories. There was, of course, the story about Mr. Flowers, who was the first
Yeah.
victim, and then a few more, but it really didn't, there really wasn't a lot of research to get into about those other people that had passed so far. But um, I imagine it was just people who were outside or in wooden homes that were destroyed.
Right.
But the next 45 minutes in Illinois would be arguably the worst devastation this country has ever seen at the hands of a tornado. And poor Illinois, like I just feel like they get it a lot.
Yeah. I also think like that's also another state that is just I don't think there's a single hill in that entire state. Like, and that's what's so bad about these tornadoes is they're just gonna keep going. Like
Yeah.
where here, luckily Tennessee, we get it pretty bad nowadays, but like east of here, I mean, there's like gonna be a mountain or something to get to hopefully
Slow
stop
it
it.
down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. The last time we had a tornado here, my neighbor was saying the same thing. It was funny. He was like, well, there's hills over here, so we should be fine. And I'm like,
Oh.
these are not significant enough hills over
Yeah.
here in Kentucky to
No.
slow down a major tornado. But anyway, I thought
Yeah.
that was funny.
Yeah.
But mountains, yes, they usually, I feel like there's, of course, one-offs.
Sure.
But yeah,
Rare.
so here we go in Illinois. And luckily, like with the tri-state tornado, I think it was a small amount in Missouri and then a small amount in Indiana, and the majority was as it was crossing Illinois.
Yeah.
Much like all the areas hit so far, the first town in Illinois to be hit was called Gorham,
Hmm.
and it really had absolutely no warning that this was coming. The storm continued to look like it was just a giant black wall. And we'll hear this often as I'm researching tornadoes. I'm hearing this often with some of the worst ones. You don't see this funnel cloud coming towards you like what we would see in Twister, right?
Right. Right.
It's just like this big dark sky, and you're kind of like looking like,
That doesn't look quite right.
yeah. So that's what this looked like to people. And just like a giant black wall moving in from the southwest.
Mhm.
So residents of Gorham didn't realize what was happening until it was on top of them. Because remember in 1925, I mean, they really had no like
Oh yeah.
news people telling them to
Yeah, no.
watch out. It hit the area at 2:26 p.m. and literally flattened every building in the town. Like there was nothing left of this whole town. At least 34 people were killed. And unfortunately, there weren't really accurate reports of the number killed back then.
Mhm.
So all of these numbers are just taken from the best researchers could do, just looking at old newspaper reports and cemetery listings of from like that time. So they
Mhm.
went through and they looked at cemeteries to see people who had died kind of around that date or on that date. So
Sure. Like who
I mean,
knows?
yeah, like you could have died from natural causes that day, you know.
Right.
So the number might be a little off, but
Right.
I think researchers they do a pretty good job of trying to narrow it
Yeah.
down. But
Best they can.
so 34 people in Gorham. Um, and there was a reporter for the St. Louis Dispatch who wrote, and this is really, I just think reporters back then, they had such a way with words, says, quote, then the air was filled with 10,000 things: boards, poles, cans, garments, stoves, whole sides of little frame houses. In some cases, the houses themselves were picked up and smashed to the earth, and living beings too. A baby was blown from its mother's arms. A cow picked up by the wind was hurled into the village restaurant.
That's your Twister reference.
It is.
I was like, wait a minute. That's got to be it.
Yeah, and they actually a lot of the scenes in Twister they pulled from real events. And so this one actually the cow was from because this is an actual newspaper article from back then.
Yeah.
And so there was a story in the newspaper about a cow that was picked up and thrown into the village restaurant like
Yeah.
while people were eating.
Yeah. Just trying to have your like cornbread and chili, and there's a cow on top of you. That's not funny,
I
but
know it, I know we have to like make light of
you
it
know,
now.
it's over a long time ago. So
Yeah. And as we talk about other tornadoes in our future episodes, there's often stories of livestock that just get blown
yeah.
away.
Yeah.
But a baby was also blown from its
I
mother's arms,
know.
and I can't even imagine.
I think I had to just laugh at the cow, so I didn't think about the baby.
I know. And I think about now, like when we're preparing for storms and stuff, and if we're under a tornado warning and we're taking cover, I always think about like if something like that happened. And so I'm like strapping helmets on the kids' heads, and
Yeah.
we have like one of those nugget couches.
Yeah.
So we're like bringing down chunks of it and like putting them on top of us. And
Yeah.
so
Well, and that's the thing that I've had to learn too. My son's little still, like pretty little. When it was a tornado warning, I was like, well, if I go, I go. And now it's like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
we have kids to protect. It changes the entire situation.
Yes, exactly right. Yep. Yeah.
So,
It's so hard because I think, I tell my husband, I'm like, you're holding on to this one
yeah. Yeah.
because I'm scared I wouldn't be strong enough. Um, but yeah, that's why I like to tell people about the bicycle helmet thing. It's like when
Yeah.
you're getting your safe space ready when a tornado watch is in place so that you can be ready when the tornado warning comes.
Hmm.
I always say, like, put your bicycle helmets in there, get those ready, and shoes, because I actually kind of figured this out in one of the more recent tornadoes that hit some of our friends' houses. Um, it was the middle of the night and it was pouring rain and it like ripped the upstairs off of their houses. And so they were caught with no electricity. It's pouring rain like into their house.
Yeah.
And so getting like shoes and making sure you have clothes. Like I always love those memes that say like put your bra on. It's
Yeah. That's
like
one thing.
sleep with your bra on or something.
Yeah. That's one thing about our mother. I can like remember her being like, don't leave the house without underwear. Like, like you never know if you're gonna like, and I think about that still. It's like ingrained in me.
I mean, you don't want to be that lady on the news.
No, we had to cut her clothes off and well, there was nothing under there.
Oh my
But yeah,
goodness.
but yeah, the shoes thing's important. I also think like just for people listening, knowing the difference between a watch and a warning. I think a lot of
Hmm.
people don't take a watch as seriously. They're like, oh, well, it could happen. And it's like, no, this is like, it's favorable. It's probably
Yeah.
going to happen. Um, you need to be taking it seriously. And I'm not sure that we've all been taught the correct way to approach a watch versus a warning.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting that I've learned since I moved away from Tennessee. In Tennessee, you have some really awesome weather people. And not that we don't up here. Like I have the utmost respect for meteorologists and all the things, but there you have some people that are really dedicated. And so, but what I've also learned is the National Weather Service has different, and we probably should do a little more research on this and share later, but I know the National Weather Service has like different branches. I don't know what they call them in
Yeah.
different areas. So like you have the one near Nashville, and then I have the one near Wilmington, Ohio. So like the one up here where I am covers a much larger area.
Area.
And so it's hard to determine because they'll, of course, issue something and they'll try to be specific about where it's going to be, but it's not as specific. And I've noticed up here that they don't issue watches as early as they do in Tennessee. And I'm sure it's
Yeah.
because Tennessee is like traumatized from things and they just are being extra cautious. But down there, I feel like they'll issue a watch like hours in advance.
Mm-hmm. That is true. I've been noticing that. Sadly, we've had a lot of bad weather recently, but I do think they're calling watches earlier, especially since the March 3rd tornado a few years ago that I'm sure we'll talk about eventually. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And up here, I have actually like asked the National Weather Service on their Facebook, um, like what it like, why isn't there a watch issued yet? Because they'll post on Facebook and say, you know, conditions are favorable for perhaps a tornado or hail or whatever. But then they won't issue a watch yet. And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to take this as a watch.
sure. Yeah. And that's
Um,
also one thing is like you have to do your own due diligence on this stuff too.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
totally.
anyways, that was a little tangent, but
Tangent.
what we're saying is these poor people in Illinois didn't have anything.
Nope, they weren't ready and did not have their bike helmets, which probably didn't even exist back then. I'll have to ask grandmommy, did y'all have
They
bike
didn't
helmets
have
when
their
you were
nugget
little?
couches back then. Uh,
No. Okay. So many crazy things happened in Gorham. One of the craziest victim stories is Margaret Brown. She was 13, and so many of the deaths were school children because of the time of day, right? It happened at like 2:30 ish.
Yep.
And so she was at school, and her dad was actually the principal. So he was there too. But I guess he was in the basement when it hit, and along with some other people. So he survived. But this is freaking wild. And I always think about the elementary school that we went to and how it
Mhm.
had like a giant bell on the top, and like schools
Oh,
back then had
yeah.
those.
Oh, no.
So, oh my gosh, Margaret was 13, poor thing. And she was actually cut in half by the giant brass bell that fell from the top of the school. I don't know why she was outside or if she was maybe like near the front of the school and it just
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure, but
Oh my gosh.
yeah, maybe that's
Margaret.
why the schools don't have bells like, well, ours, I think
Well,
ours still does.
I know. I pass that school every day, and there it is.
Should tell them that they should
Yeah.
probably take that
Hey,
down.
you should listen to our podcast about this bell.
Yeah, it's troublesome.
Oof. That is really,
Uh,
really sad.
yeah, and her mother also died because the tornado hit their house too. Because you got to remember, Gorham, basically the tornado took out every building.
Everything.
So
Yeah.
any house, any school, business, whatever. So her father did survive though. But
Mm.
believe it or not, the worst has not happened yet.
Jeez Louise.
I know. And so that was at 2:25, 2:30-ish. So literally just a few minutes later at 2:34 p.m., the tornado hit Murfreesboro, Illinois, not to
Mm.
be confused with Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Mhm.
It's not spelled the same.
Oh,
Mm-hmm. 234 people were killed in Murfreesboro. So that actually still holds the record for the most people to be killed by a tornado in a single town.
sure. I mean, you would think that this town probably only had, maybe 1,000 people in it. I mean, that's like
Yeah, I
20% of
bet
your
it didn't even
town, you
have
know?
that many. Mm-hmm.
Ugh, so awful.
It was so Murfreesboro was an industrial town. And at the time, it was well known for being pretty lax with prohibition laws. So it's funny
Mm.
because I think like maybe they did have more people living there because,
Yeah, because of that.
yeah.
Maybe. I
Um,
would.
yeah, alcohol was still super easy to come by.
Hmm.
And it's funny because if you look at pictures of Murfreesboro, Illinois from back then, it actually reminds me of Old Hickory Village
Oh,
in
yeah.
Tennessee with like, it's industrial. So it's got like the plants, but then
Yep.
also like all the little homes near the plant.
Yeah.
So as the tornado entered Murfreesboro, it immediately started flattening homes on the outskirts of town. It crossed the Muddy River into the town. It's actually called the Muddy River. It's not just
Okay.
a muddy river,
Got it. Heard.
the Muddy River into town and continued to just flatten buildings. The winds were so strong they were debarking trees. So it's so funny because you'll hear that in a lot of reports too. And as over the years, as they started rating tornadoes with the Fujita scale and all of that, debarking of trees is something that they specifically look for because, I guess
Okay.
winds have
Yeah.
to be pretty legit for that to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
It was also ripping them completely out of the ground and throwing them many hundreds of feet and just killing people as it was going along.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a good point of like, I feel like, and now I have a personal experience with this, but I feel like most deaths from a tornado are just debris or like it,
Mhm.
like impalement or things like that. So even if you are in your house, like that, your house is probably not going to kill you. It's going to be something just flying around in the air.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, that's the thing too, is like I always grew up thinking like you're going to die because the tornadoes, and maybe this is because of Twister,
Yeah, maybe.
like it's going to just like rip you up and, um, you know,
Yeah.
throw
Well,
you. But that can happen, but less
sure.
likely.
But also when we were younger, we didn't have tornadoes like this. So in our heads, it was kind of like a mystery, like, oh, It's just going to pick us up and throw us around. We didn't know what they were as much as we do now.
Yep.
Um, yeah, tornadoes are just a lot more common now, sadly.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, just killing people as it goes.
Yeah.
It hit the Longfellow School, and it killed 17 children because basically, it's funny because we did just kind of say that your house isn't going to kill you, but the school collapsed and
Mm.
like crushed a bunch of them, I think. So sometimes, like, if you're in the path, you can do as much as you
Yeah.
can, but
Yeah.
it's your time. It's your time.
Yeah. It is kind of terrifying to think those poor kids were just at school. Like it really does depend on the time of day that these things happen.
Yeah. Yeah. A
Crazy.
railroad shop and roundhouse. So it's funny because I always think of Thomas the Train when I think of roundhouse.
Yeah.
They were directly hit, which was just east of the school. 35 workers were killed due to flying train cars.
Holy crap.
So, yeah, talk about debris. That's
Yeah.
debris for
That's,
you.
yeah.
And some actually survived by hiding under some of the heavy machinery that, like,
Hmm.
it didn't pick up, thank goodness.
Hmm.
So, and then this is really crazy too. At the First Baptist Church at 15th and Logan Street, there was a funeral happening, um, which this is so crazy. The funeral was actually happening in the basement, and that was
Oh,
because the sanctuary was under construction. So,
well, thank God, literally. Oh,
wow,
uh,
because the upstairs was completely destroyed, but everyone at the funeral survived. And when they
uh,
climbed up out of the rubble, they looked around and they were like, what the
mhm.
heck? They saw the school, which was just right down the road, and they were like,
Yeah.
oh no. And they just like ran over trying to help any of the surviving kids.
Yeah.
So that was crazy. I mean, can you imagine like it, no coincidence, I guess, that they were all in the basement when it happened.
Yeah.
And it was just like crazy. But
Yeah.
anyway, so as we continue on with more and more destruction, I think I'm going to leave us here
Mm.
for part one. And we will, in part two, talk about, as the tornado finishes its path, which I will say does not get any better,
Mm.
it gets worse.
Yeah.
And so we'll continue talking about that. And so I hope that everyone can join us back for that part two of the tri state tornado.
Yeah. And we will continue to try to educate you on like warnings, watches. That's what this podcast is really for. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And not only can you learn about it here, but you can learn about it on our social media. So Instagram is at Weathered Podcast, TikTok at Weathered Pod, POD. And then if you have your own weather stories and you want to bring them in so we can kind of talk about it, you can tell us your experiences. You can email us at weatheredpodcast@gmail.com.
That's it. Yep. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. And until next time, make sure and stay weather aware. And we'll be
See
back
ya.
soon. Bye.
Bye.